Jackson School of International Studies at the University of Washington presents World Focus, a continuing series on international political, social, economic, and cultural issues.
This is the sound of the recited Qur'an. In Islamic communities, it's a common and daily event, not restricted to special occasions, nor even to the context of religious context. You may hear a beggar sitting with palm outstretched in a residential neighborhood, reciting with full voice. You may take a taxi to the accompaniment of recitation recorded on cassette. You may deliver your laundry, buy meat, and find that most shopkeepers along your route have their radios tuned to reciting. Halfway up the block, a group of men sitting formally on small stools which spill out into the sidewalk are listening to a recording of recitation. They are there to honor the memory of a deceased colleague. A business is opened, and the event is marked with lights, flowers, and the sound of recitation broadcast out into the surrounding streets. At a summit conference, reciters representing the participating countries perform in turn. Radio stations open and close their daily programming with recitation. Radio and television program recitation regularly during the course of the day. On the religious radio station in Egypt, Zat al-Qur'an al-Karim, you can listen to live performance of recitation in the context of religious liturgy or of commemorative and official events, or you may listen to a program presenting selections from a heritage of over 40 years of recordings of Quranic recitation. When I first heard this sound, I found it compelling and unique. I assumed, as would most of us here, that it was a kind of music, and I was curious as to what made it different and what made it the same from Arabic music. In fact, one of the central issues coming out of my research is the status of Quranic recitation vis-a-vis music. What you have just heard is not considered music at all, even though the presence of melody, artistry, and rhythm are not only acknowledged, but in the Egyptian and authoritative tradition encouraged. A second and no less central issue coming out of the research is the importance of the sound of recitation to understanding the Qur'an and its role in Islam. I'd like to give you then some idea of just what is involved in the recitation of the Qur'an. It is not just a straightforward performance of a religious text set to music. What are the skills and knowledge it demands, the issues and beliefs it invokes and responses it evokes, and what is the effect of all this on the sound? To understand recitation, one must first understand the nature of the text involved. It's not merely eloquent religious poetry or narrative. It is the Qur'an, the ultimate authority and generator of Islamic law as revealed by God to his Prophet Muhammad. Muslims believe that the Qur'an is the last in a series of divine revelations, including the Torah and the Gospels. The Qur'an has been compared to these holy books by both Muslims and non-Muslims alike. But in fact, the Qur'an has a unique dimension, its oral nature. Not only is it the Word of God, Holy Scripture in which is set down God's law and promise for humanity and the history of creation and of his interaction with mankind, it is also the language, the sound of the divine, and the Qur'an must be heard, not only read. The revelation was not written down except in bits and pieces until after the Prophet's death. Then the authoritative reference for the written text was the recited Qur'an as it had been memorized by the followers and companions of the Prophet. An indication of the primary importance of the sound of the Qur'an is the fact that when the written text was first distributed to each Islamic community, it was accompanied by a reciter who was there to teach the sound. It is said that every prophet has a miracle as proof of his prophethood, and the Qur'an is considered the miracle of Muhammad's prophethood. The proof of its divine source is in its inimitable euphony, eloquence, and wisdom, for Muhammad was neither poet nor sage, but an unlettered merchant. The sound of the recited Qur'an is compelling. There are many stories of repentance, conversion, swooning, even dying upon hearing the Qur'an. These stories testify to its effect, spiritual and aesthetic, and they are inseparable on believer and unbeliever alike. For the believer, this power and beauty is explained by the Qur'an's divine source and authority. Most Westerners find this claim to beauty baffling, for they have had access only to the written text, whether in the original Arabic or in translation. But it's only in the vocalized text that the full miracle is realized. Much of the euphony can be attributed to the structure of the Arabic language itself. Gender, mood, person, plurality are all signified by suffixes, prefixes, and particular consonant vowel patterns that easily lend themselves to rhyme and parallel syntax and rhythm. So, for example, what reads as a fairly prosaic passage on the behavior of women in English, and say to the believing women that they should lower their gaze and guard their modesty, that they should not display their beauty and ornaments except what must ordinarily appear thereof, that they should draw their veils over their bosoms and not display their beauty except to their fathers, and then there follows a long list of to whom they might display their beauty. This reads in Arabic, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وقل للمؤمنات يغضضن من أبصارهن ويحفظن فروجهن ولا يبدين زينتهن إلا ما ظهر منها وليضربن بخمرهن على جيوبهن ولا يبدين زينتهن إلا لبعولتهن. The effect is a repeated line plus the repetition of the feminine plural possessive pronoun, hin or hun, depending on its syntax. In the following example, you can see how the language lends itself to rhyme. The Arabic rhyme words are sahun, yura'un, and al-ma'un. The equivalent words in English are those who are neglectful, those who want to be seen, and neighborly needs. The complete passage is, who are neglectful of their prayers, those who want but to be seen of men, but refuse to supply even neighborly needs. The Arabic reads, الذين هم عن صلاتهم ساهون الذين هم يراءون ويمنعون الماعون. The following example is strong in imagery and syntax, both of which translate well into English and other languages. What does not translate is the rhyme in Arabic. When the sun with its spacious light is folded up, when the stars fall losing their luster, when the mountains vanish like a mirage, when the she-camels 10 months with young are left untended, when the wild beasts are herded together in human habitations, when the oceans boil over with a swell, when the souls are sorted out being joined like with like, when the female infant buried alive is questioned for what crime she was killed, when the scrolls are laid open, when the world on high is unveiled, when the blazing fire is kindled to fierce heat, and when the garden is brought near, then shall each soul know what it has put forward. إذا الشمس كورت وإذا النجوم انكدرت وإذا الجبال سيرت وإذا العشار عطلت وإذا الوحوش حشرت وإذا البحار سجرت وإذا النفوس زوجت وإذا الموءودة سئلت بأي ذنب قتلت وإذا الصحف نشرت وإذا السماء كشطت وإذا الجحيم سعرت وإذا الجنة أزلفت علمت نفس ما أحضرت. Quranic Arabic also has a unique sound, distinct from literary and spoken Arabic. To guard against the distortions and variants of oral tradition, Muslim scholars compiled a code of rules which preserve the Qur'an in its oral manifestation. As a last revelation, it is especially crucial that it be preserved in all its aspects. In fact, it's believed that previous revelations were subjected to distortion. This explains for Muslims the difference between the Jewish, Christian, and Islamic religions. The code of rules, called tajweed, regulates the sound in detail, preserving what is believed to be the actual sound of the revelation. Whereas the written text preserves words, syntax, and order of material, tajweed preserves the sound, the pronunciation of each phoneme, the voice quality or timbre, and duration of each syllable. Even children who have not actually studied the rules of tajweed recognize that whether in the context of formal speech, informal conversation, or prayer, the words of the Qur'an demand special rhythmic and phonic patterns which mark its divine origin, and it's incumbent upon all believers to learn to recite the Qur'an as it was revealed, that is, according to the rules of tajweed. Let me give some examples of Quranic Arabic so you can compare them. One of the regulating principles is qalqala, which gives to 4 consonants which are otherwise silent in certain words a vowel sound schwa. Thus what in literary Arabic reads wasjud waqtarib becomes wasjud waqtarib. Not only is the rhythm changed, but the stress is changed. Another principle, gunna, dictates that the syllable be articulated nasally, and this applies to some doubled consonants as well as to some whole syllables, such as tantahu becomes tantahu, kaukabun durriyun becomes kaukabun durriyun. The principles of ikhfa and idgham regulate the assimilation, total or partial, of consonants. According to ikhfa, any consonant followed by one of 15 other consonants is only partially articulated and the preceding vowel nasalized. This applies to the examples I just gave. Tantahu, the n drops out and the whole syllable is nasalized. According to idgham, any consonant followed by m, n, w, y, l, or r sounds are all nasalized as well. Those sounds are nasalized and doubled. Thus, durriyun yuqadu becomes durriyun yuqadu. La shajaratin wa becomes la shajaratin wa. And shajaratin mubarakatin becomes shajaratin mubaraka. Notice, too, with these examples how precise the back voweling is. That is the change from a to a, which is dictated by the presence of certain consonants in literary Arabic. In literary and spoken Arabic, it tends to take over the whole word. Thus, qamar or qamar, take one example, in literary Arabic becomes qamar in Quranic Arabic. Ashab is ashab. There are no back vowels in that word at all in Quranic Arabic because the principle is much more precisely effected. The last example deals with a very important aspect of Quranic Arabic, duration, or mad, and it is this which gives Quranic Arabic its characteristic rhythms. Syllables vary from 1 to 6 beats according to their makeup, short, long, open, closed. The shortest is a short open syllable, and the longest is a long syllable before doubled consonants, as in waladdallin. Let me give you an example of how the rhythms may vary. They don't have, the rhythm of the Qur'an is not the meters of pre-Islamic poetry, though these occur in various places in the Qur'an. Its effect is really in its variability and unpredictability. I'll continue with part of a text which I gave you an example from earlier. Then shall each soul know what it has put forward. So verily I call to witness the planets that recede. Continue. I won't read the whole translation. علمت نفس ما أحضرت فلا أقسم بالخنس الجوار الكنس والليل إذا عسعس والصبح إذا تنفس إنه لقول رسول كريم ذي قوة عند ذي العرش مكين مطاع ثم أمين. The sound is effectively linked to meaning in many places of the text. I have an example of how a change in meter is used to highlight the text. The text in English is, "And O people, your companion is not one possessed, and without doubt he saw him in the clear horizon. Neither doth he withhold grudgingly a knowledge of the unseen, nor is it the word of an evil spirit accursed. Then whither go ye? Yani, why hesitate? And this is the crucial line. And then the text goes on to say just what this word is. Verily, it is no less than a message to all the worlds. This line, then whither go ye, is highlighted by an absolutely regular meter, taram, 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 sandwiched between a much less regular meter. وَمَا صَاحِبُكُمْ بِمَجْنُونَ وَلَقَدْ رَآهُ بِالْأُفُقِ الْمُبِينِ وَمَا هُوَ عَلَى الْغَيْبِ بِضَنِينٍ وَمَا هُوَ بِقَوْلِ شَيْطَانٍ رَجِيمٍ فَأَيْنَ تَذْهَبُونَ إِنْ هُوَ إِلَّا ذِكْرٌ لِلْعَالَمِينَ. You see the فَأَيْنَ تَذْهَبُونَ suddenly stopping the flow of the rhythm. This is an important point. The sound is not something to memorize routinely, automatically. It must be integrated with meaning, and in terms of the reciter, with the intent. It's not enough to master the sound. The reciter must be aware of its significance, both ultimate and immediate. Thus, in tajweed, there's a guide for understanding the text, for bringing out meaning and subtleties of meaning, and this is organized around breath control. Traditionally, the reciter may interrupt his reading to take a breath, cough, sneeze whenever necessary. Tajweed makes him aware of the most suitable as well as the most unsuitable stopping places, so that his interruptions do not distort the meaning of the text. For example, if I were to read, "We have indeed created man in the best of molds, then do we abase him to be the lowest of the low." Breath, cough, whatever, except such as believe and do righteous deeds. The listener is left with the wrong impression in the first line, that God has abased man to be the lowest of the low, with no possibility of redemption. According to tajweed, the reciter is required to back up and bridge that gap, so that he must read, "We have indeed created man in the best of molds, then do we abase him to be the lowest of the low." To be the lowest of the low, except such as believe and do righteous deeds. There are a few places in the Qur'an where the stop determines the actual meaning, and these are marked to guide the reciter. And very often reciters will, in the course of a public performance, cover both possibilities. The basis then for reciting is a knowledge of tajweed. There are beyond this two basic sounds of the Qur'an depending on the context in which it's recited. What I call the private style is heard primarily in the context of study, learning, devotion, and prayer. There's no conscious use of artistry, melody, or drama. It's a straightforward reading, and the reciter concentrates on clear and accurate transmission of the text. It's very difficult not to use some heightened form of reading. Each man, woman, or child has his own characteristic pitch patterns. And in this style, it's the reciter's response to the sound of the text, the euphony, the rhythm, or perhaps it's even more the rhythms of the text that determine the pitches. It's not any conscious attempt on the part of the reciter to create melody. In the following example, you can hear, you can compare to my style, the style of a teacher of the rules of tajweed.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين.
There's another sound more commonly associated with Quranic recitation because it's a public style. It's heard in public context. It's performed in Egypt by a skilled elite of professional reciters who consciously use artistry and the elements of music with the aim of enhancing the effect of the recitation on the listeners, more specifically engaging the emotions of the listeners. The professional reciter has mastered tajweed. He may have mastered the various qira'at or text variants. He may or may not have training in Arabic music. Whatever his training, the professional reciter will be conscious of the effect of recitation on his listeners. The characteristic sound of this style is determined by a number of factors. During a performance of recitation, the reciter is guided by certain conventions, constraints, and expectations. For example, the melodic frame. The recitation begins and ends in the same melodic mode or melodic configuration. The melodic resolutions, the use of melodic variation, transposition, and modulation are all part of the Arabic music tradition. And use of these melodic principles varies from reciter to reciter, according to the individual talent and intent of the reciter. Most reciters have a characteristic style and are easily distinguished from one another. The following example is by Sheikh Muhammad Siddiq al-Minshawi, and it's a recitation of the same text you heard in the previous example, in the different style. His is a very selective use of pitch. Through most of the recitation, it's almost monotone, and he saves a more elaborate use of melody for the end, a very dramatic end. You can also hear in this example how tajweed alters the sound. The reciter repeats the same phrase with two different uses of tajweed. The first time the phrase is given in separate, the text is given in the phrase Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim Maliki Yawm Ad-Din. Ar-Rahim is given the vowel E, which is according to the rules of Arabic grammar. Tajweed gives him the option of dropping that E and therefore running the two M sounds together, and he ends up with the longest duration, the mad lazim, and also of a nasalized sound. So, Ar-Rahmani Rahim Maliki Yawm Ad-Din. And he gives these options. It's a good example of how tajweed can change the sound. Listen also to the reciter's use of register. That is, whether he's in the upper pitches or the lower. This might be a function of physical capability. Reciters often drop to the lower register to rest their voices. It also may be a function of artistry. The use of the higher register increases tension. The lower may either delay resolution or tension, or provide release from tension. Let's hear that example.
كلا لا تطعه واسجد واقترب بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد فيه هدى للمتقين. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. ألف لام ميم ذلك الكتاب لا ريب فيه. هدى للمتقين. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. ألف لام ميم.
The next example is of Sheikh Ali Mahmoud. He was a famous reciter and singer in the 30s and 40s. He's noted for his extreme pitch variation and fast-paced modulations.
يوم تبلى السرائر فما له من قوة ولا ناصر.
I think this is a very dramatic example of the contrast of personal styles. In the following example, we hear a reciter explain how he correlates the melodic modes to the meaning he wishes to focus on in the text. It's a good example of the reciter's sensitivity to subtlety, as the two emotions he wants to convey are regret and grief. There's a tradition of associating the Arabic melodic modes to emotions, but whether in fact these shades of meaning are thus conveyed to the listener is a moot point. What shapes the phrases is the reciter's mastery of the Arabic melodic system and his intent.
لازم نغمة تحسس الإنسان بالألم والندم. أقول كده مثلا: أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم، بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وجيء يومئذ بجهنم يومئذ يتذكر الإنسان وأنى له الذكرى يقول يا ليتني قدمت لحياتي. صدق الله العظيم. دي النغمة دي اسمها ايه؟ نهاوند. أنا بصور هذه الآية بهذا الأسلوب. ممكن أصورها بمقام تاني اسمه الصبا. أقول كده: أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم، بسم الله. وجيء يومئذ بجهنم يومئذ يتذكر الإنسان وأنى له الذكرى يقول يا ليتني قدمت لحياتي. الله العظيم. بردها المعنى ده يتمشى مع المعنى القرآني لأنه مقام الصبا مقام حزين.
The reciter may also structure the text with the aim of making it as clear as possible. He may repeat in order to emphasize some part of the text. One convention is to repeat short and meaningful segments of text in separate phrases, then to recapitulate and do the whole passage in one breath. This allows for both clarity of text and creative use of melody. The nature of the text is probably the most significant factor in determining the sound of the public style. For example, the nature of the text determines that melody be spontaneous and not precomposed. A precomposed or memorized melody would fix what is divine to the limitations of human creativity. Adapting existing melodies to the text risks distorting the given rhythms as well. The melody should ideally be inspired by and suited to the text in the particular moment of rendition. Nor is the reciter free, as is the singer, to play with the text or make changes in it for the sake of melodic inspiration. And his use of melodic ornamentation is restricted because all of his efforts must serve the text rather than the demands of aesthetics or of virtuosity. One of the most common criticisms of melodic recitation is that it does risk distorting the divinely given rhythms of the text. And in fact, it is in the rhythm that most mistakes are made. It is a valid criticism. Each syllable has a given duration, and the overall rhythm is neither regular nor predictable. And it's very difficult to keep track of when one is improvising a melody. Melodies tend to have a life of their own. In an anecdote told by a critic of melodic recitation, a religious scholar is asked why he objects to the use of melody in recitation. "What is your name?" asked the scholar. "Muhammad," is the reply. Says the scholar, "Well, how would you like it if someone said to you, Muhammad?" The supremacy of the text, the selective use of only melodic and not rhythmic principles of Arabic music are significant factors in distinguishing Quranic recitation from music, whether secular or religious. It's not just a matter of perception, it's not just a mental juggling that distinguishes recitation from music. As we shall see, it's the responsibility of the reciter to keep this distinction. It's important that melodic recitation not be perceived as music. If it is perceived as music, it loses its unique status, becoming just another form of entertainment or mere art. This undermines the divine and perfect nature of the text. Furthermore, there is a reluctance to associate the Qur'an with music because of the unresolved status of music vis-a-vis Islam. In the Qur'an, there's no authoritative pronouncement on the status of music, although a number of different factions take verses and interpret them in justification of their points of view. The question is still being discussed today in academic dissertations, in the media, and even in homes. It's a crucial issue because the popularity of music has at times made it a rival for the attentions of the Muslim, and music has had un-Islamic associations such as drinking alcohol and sexual immorality. Thus, a great deal of effort has been spent showing that music can justifiably be accepted under the umbrella of Islam, or else refuting it completely as a vain and foolish distraction, while admitting its power over men's minds and emotions. It is the recognition of music's power to ensnare people's minds that renders it acceptable in the service of the Qur'an. The reciter must be aware of both the power and risks that his melody entails. He must be on guard that his use of artistry not distort the meaning of the event. The reciter wants to touch his listeners, engage their emotions, but keep them focused on the text and not on his skill and artistry. Listener response should be subdued and not interfere with or distract from the text. A reciter who excites his listener to a boisterous and fever pitch is, however correct in his use of tajweed, to be faulted for inappropriate use of his talents. Such reciting tends to blur the distinction between reciting and singing. People come for the emotional high and tend to ignore the text. I heard a number of comments and criticisms of how reciters and listeners alike ignored the meaning of the text being recited, to the extent that when the subject was the agonies of hell, listeners responded with, "Ah, how beautiful." The following example is just such an example of this kind of recitation. Sheikh Mustafa Ismail is one of the most melodic of the Egyptian reciters. He has his followers and his detractors. He cannot be faulted for his use of tajweed, but as you will hear, his audience response is often inappropriate.
والسماء ذات الرجع والأرض ذات الصدع إنه لقول فصل وما هو بالهزل إنهم يكيدون كيدا وأكيد كيدا فمهل الكافرين أمهلهم
مش معقول والله ما معقول كده يا اخي.
What is involved then in a recitation of the Qur'an is evoking the actual moment of revelation, the divine and perfectly beautiful, and all the implications of the event of revelation itself, as well as the specific meaning of the text, but not just the specific meaning of the text. The reciter cannot help but be aware of the show business side of his profession, his fees, his reputation, media exposure, fans, etc. And it is this which draws criticism of the Egyptian tradition of recitation. And his listeners do expect that he move them with melodic creativity, good voice, skillful sectioning of the text, and that he be responsive to his listeners. Yet he must also be correct in tajweed and sensitive to the meaning of the text. The challenge of the art lies in walking the fine line between making creative use of aesthetic options and keeping the text primary. The skill it demands is incredible, the sound produced compelling.